Hey guys, and welcome to A Taste for Life. Today's video is Calories on Menus Part 2. And if you haven't seen Part 1, you can find it on YouTube, and the link is also available on all my social media. So I just want to give a little quick recap of Part 1, just in case people haven't seen it or have forgotten. But essentially, I started a discussion around calories being on menus. So in the UK, there is now a legal obligation for restaurants, cafes, or takeaway shops who have over 250 employees to put calories on their menus. And people had a lot of opinions about this. So in Part 1, I discussed the positives of having calories on menus. And in Part 2, I'm going to put up the points of people who protest having calories on menus. And I think it's pretty evident if you watch Part 1 that you'll notice I agree with having calories on menus, but I do want to look at the other side and see the reasons why people don't want calories on menus. However, I will also be discussing why I don't necessarily agree with those points. And that's not to say that I'm correct or anything, that's just my opinion. So if you have a different perspective, feel free to leave a comment. So I'm going to do this video a little bit differently just to fast track everything. And I'm going to begin by just listing the reasons that I've heard people are protesting having calories on menus. So the first one is that it's a shaming tactic. So whether it's intentional or not, people feel that by having calories on menus, it might shame people into making different choices than what they actually want. Particularly focusing on people with a larger body size, they may feel obligated to order something with lower calories. That way there's no risk of judgment. People also argue that by having calories on menus, it can be very triggering for people who have eating disorders, particularly those who calorie count, but also those who don't, as it can lead to calorie counting behaviors. And in a similar note, people also argue that by having calories on menus, it can lead to the development of eating disorders. And then the final point that I've heard is just a general hyperfixation with calories. And that it's unnecessary to have them on the menu because it just leads to focusing on particular numbers, which can be detrimental to a person's overall well-being. So I'm not going to argue these points individually. Rather, I just want to present a few ideas around why I don't think these are particularly harmful in the effects of having calories on menus. But as always, just my opinion. And I mainly wanted to put out some of these ideas because they're actually comments that I've never really heard being put forward before. So there is a lot of discussion around the negative sides of having calories on menus, but there's not a lot of rebuttal against that. And I think it's because a lot of the arguments are coming from within the eating disorder recovery space. So not many people would have conflicting ideas around what's already out there. And I think most people in the recovery community, from what I can see, do agree that having calories on menus is detrimental. But hopefully with the ideas that I put forward, it gives a slightly different perspective from someone who is also in eating disorder recovery. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that I can walk into a grocery store right now, and I know I'm from Australia, but I'm pretty sure this is also the case in the UK. I can walk into a grocery store and any product that I pick up, which is a consumable and is packaged, is going to have a nutritional panel on it. On that nutritional panel, it discloses the calories per serve and per 100 gram or mil. And it also lists things like the fat content, the carbohydrate content, the protein, the sodium, the sugar, any micronutrients, all that kind of stuff is so easily accessible. And this is just from going to the supermarket. Now, everyone is different, but for me, eating out is more of a special occasion thing. So I'd say like 90% of the time, I'm either eating in or I'm bringing something from home to eat out, like at work, just say. And I think that's where we lose a little bit of the focus, is that we are, as a society, fine with having that information on our packages when we go to the grocery store. But when it comes to putting it on menus, it is such a big topic. And I think it's blown a little bit out of proportion when we consider the fact that most of us will eat in and usually buy our consumables from the grocery store where we have access to that information anyway. But also, it's not like the information that they're showing on the box isn't accessible anyway. I mean, I could probably go online for any product that I wanted to know the calories for and just look on the company website, and usually they will also have that information on there. So my point is sort of that this calorie information is already accessible and it's already in our face. Anytime we buy something at the grocery store, it has that information right there in front of us. And I understand that it may not necessarily be as visible, like when you read it off a menu, it's like right there. But it's not like if people were looking for that information, they couldn't turn the box of a package or look on the side and find that all out anyway. And I don't want to be too harsh or blunt about this, but if we look at it through a scope of reality, I think we'll come to realize that people who calorie count are going to do it anyway. And it may be devastating, but the fact is, if someone wants to know the calories of something, they're going to know. And generally speaking, if someone has calorie counting as part of their eating disorder and they're going to go out for a meal, they'll probably either pick an option that they can work out the calories really easily themselves, or something that they have similar at home so they already know the calories, or something they feel they can guess pretty easily. But generally, I would say the only time that they'd agree to eat out is if they can come up with some kind of estimation as to what the calories in that meal is going to equate to. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, why are we going to perpetuate that? Why would we put calories on menus and then someone who may be a calorie counter goes in, sees the calories for that meal and thinks, oh my gosh, I underestimated how many calories were in that, and then it might deter them from actually ordering what they want. And whilst I'm very sensitive to that being a real scenario and something that could potentially happen, I think we need to remember that that is an eating disorder issue, not a calories on menus issue. But I will explain that a little bit better a little bit later on. So the next thing I want to talk about is the argument that having calories on menus could potentially cause people to develop eating disorders. Now, not only do I think that is a gross simplification of how eating disorders actually develop, I just think it's a really illogical thought to have when we put calories on menus. So let's look at the most vulnerable group who would be susceptible to developing an eating disorder from finally seeing calories on menus. And I guess that group would be someone or people suffering from orthorexia. Now, orthorexia is not officially an eating disorder, but it's used to describe someone who eats clean. So kind of maybe they stick to organic foods, maybe they don't eat refined sugars. It looks different for a lot of people, but the point is it's kind of the step just below an eating disorder. So if having calories on menus was going to trigger anyone into an eating disorder, they would probably be the most vulnerable group. So to link it back to my previous argument for a second, and keep in mind people who eat cleanly or have orthorexia, if that person really wanted to take it to the next level and they thought they could do that through calorie counting, the information is more in their face than calories on menus will ever be. Walking into the supermarket, buying your groceries, it's all there right in front of you. So it's very unlikely that the sudden calories on menus would cause their mind to shift so much that they think, okay, now I can see that, I'm going to start tracking my calories. It's just too much of a stretch for me to think it makes sense as an argument. I also feel like that the notion that calories being on menus is going to push someone into an eating disorder is kind of ridiculous, because There are people in the general community whose entire job revolves around knowing exactly how many calories is in particular foods. And the obvious one is dietitians and nutritionists, but it can also go down to people like personal trainers. These people look at calories day in and day out, and just because they know that information, it doesn't automatically mean that they have an eating disorder. And also, not that this should even have to be explained, but I think we can all appreciate the fact that eating disorder development is a lot more complicated than looking at a menu and seeing calories and thinking, okay, now I've got an eating disorder because I want to know calories on everything and I want to calorie track. It doesn't quite work that way. So research has shown that the development of eating disorders also has a genetic and biological component to it. And that is as well as stemming from environmental factors, past traumas, and also comorbidities. So if you look at the typical eating disorder population, generally they'll be suffering with another comorbidity. And that could be they have an eating disorder, but they also have anxiety, or they also have depression, or they also have OCD, or they also have ADHD. Whatever the case, a lot of time there is a link between an eating disorder and another thing that's going on with it. And to say that calories on menus can prompt someone's eating disorder is just a really gross simplification of what an eating disorder actually is and how it comes to be about. As a final point, I just want to strip back this argument a little bit and analyze calories. So, calories are just scientific pieces of information used to describe the amount of energy in consumables. They are not the enemy here. The enemy may be eating disorders, and the enemy may be society's overall view of calories and the amount that we see on social media about what is correct and incorrect in relation to calorie consumption. But a lot of the time, this is just misinformation. The calories themselves are doing nothing wrong. We're either misinformed or we have an eating disorder and have a skewed perception. But it doesn't make calories dangerous. It doesn't make having that information dangerous. And it certainly does not mean that we should not have access to that information. Now, I know I've given a lot of food for thought here, but I just want to leave you with this thought. Say we're looking at someone who has an eating disorder and their most complicated behavior in relation to their eating disorder is that they have an exercise addiction. Now, it is detrimental to that person 100% if they are over abusing their time in the gym, if they are pushing themselves to extreme limits in order to lose weight, if it is becoming dangerous at all. It is definitely not a good thing. But it doesn't mean that we're going to close that gym down. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop allowing fitness and exercise at all. That is just one person's illness leading them to an extreme behavior, and we can't let it crumble the rest of society. And that's what I feel like would happen if we're forced to take calories off menus or off grocery items or just not be able to access that information at all. Like, yes, it may trigger a certain particular group, but that group are sick. They are sick people and they need help. And that solution is not getting rid of that information. The solution is helping them to recover and be in a better place where calories are no longer a trigger for them. I also just want to say that I really hope this isn't coming across as insensitive, because I can totally understand why having calories on menus would be triggering to a whole bunch of people. I guess it would mostly impact those trying to recover from an eating disorder and to have calorie counting as part of their eating disorder, or even those recovering who didn't have calorie counting as part of their eating disorder. It can be pretty confronting to have that information right there in front of you and not be tempted to look at it and make a choice based on the lowest amount of calories. So I do understand the complications there, but what I would encourage you to do is that remember that first of all, you're trying to recover, so you're trying to ignore that information. And it could be that you just need to be a little bit carefully strategic about when you go out. maybe go out with family or friends, which, let's face it, usually when we're eating a meal out, it is with someone. But maybe whoever is accompanying you can read you the menu so you don't actually have to see it and you won't see any calories. You just pick based on what sounds good to you. Or you could try developing a list before you go to the restaurant. So say, for example, I'm going to an Italian restaurant. I might say the first thing I'd want is a risotto. If they don't have that, then I'll see if they have a soup. If they don't want that, then I'll have pasta, gnocchi. If they don't have that, then I want a pizza. And basically just make a list of what you think will be there. And as soon as the waitress says yes to one of them, there's your choice. Otherwise, I do hear that a lot of the places in the UK who are mandated to have calories on menus have also got a version without calories on it if you request it specifically. So you will be default presented one with calories, but if you specifically ask for one without it, my understanding is that a lot of places still cater to that and it's a solution to your problem. But just remember, calories are not the enemy, it is the eating disorder, and going through recovery may be confronting at times, but that's all part of the challenge. So if having that information there is a little bit triggering for you, try to work around it or at least try to challenge it a little bit. I hope this has been informative and I hope it's given a little bit of a different perspective. But as always, I'd love to hear your comments, so please leave them below and I'll speak to you soon.